Okay, welcome to the Tactical Pause podcast. I'm Kevin Price,
I'm Kevin Reed.
and I want to thank you all for returning to watch our podcast again. I know last week we had a lot to unpack. We talked about the war in Iran, we talked about ICE, the Epstein files, the Texas Senate race. But first, I do want to encourage everyone, if they do like the channel, to go ahead and like and subscribe. That does help with the YouTube algorithm, and it is the best way to support our channel, really. So this week, we've had a lot of similar stuff regarding the war in Iran. We also are going to talk about the Democratic Party race in Texas, because I think that is a big topic. From Iran, we're going to talk about Israel. We're also going to talk about what's going on between Ukraine and Russia as well, because that's something we've kind of pivoted away from as a country with all the hype about Iran. And then we'll see where it goes from there. But just to jump off, I knew that Tallarico won the Texas Senate race, well, the primary rather. However, I did not realize until just today how well the Democratic Party did. Just for some context, Democrats had 2.3 million voters show out in comparison to Republicans' 2.16 voters. Now, there are still some numbers coming in, but that is actually pretty epic. This is the first time since 2002 that Democrats have had a majority vote. So I'm curious to what your thoughts are.
It was, as someone who lives in a red state, it was really, I thought, a good sign for the future. The hope is that we have the Democratic Party really meeting voters' needs. And I think that, especially in some parts of rural parts of states, the Democratic Party kind of after NAFTA just left with the union jobs that were there. So to see the turnout in some of these more rural counties, now I don't know where Starr County is in Texas, but I did note when we were talking about the agenda for this week, I did note that Starr County, Texas, went for Trump by 58 points, and I think 96% of the votes went for Democrats in the primary in that county.
Oh,
I
wow.
think when you see that kind of movement, it is a signal shift. It's something that I'm cautiously optimistic by. I do think my personal opinion I lived in Texas only a brief time when I was stationed in San Antonio. But my understanding is James Tallarico, I think, is the type of Democrat that does do a good job in uniting just sort of a good coalition of both Democrats and independents, maybe some moderate Republicans who are kind of tired of the politics as usual, the way that Texas Republicans have run the state or how Texas Republicans have run in the federal government. So I think he does build bridges. My fear was always that Congresswoman Crockett was going to be an easy lightning rod for attacks and would have made it very difficult to get policy going and traction going towards how she would govern. So I felt that was a good thing, though. I thought that the numbers looked great for Democrats out of Texas.
And, I do think that both Jasmine Crockett and James Tallarico really contributed to this number of Democrats, because while Jasmine Crockett may not have won the primary, she did bring out people in droves to the polls, just like Tallarico did. So I think the combination of the two really helped them bring it home. And then the Republican candidates are now in a runoff, which there's so much infighting between the Republican Party, which I think is great for Democrats in Texas. So if there's ever going to be a blue wave in Texas, if there's ever going to be a flipping of Texas, I think this might actually be it here in 2026. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm feeling pretty good about it.
I was going to ask you, based on what you see now versus how Beto O'Rourke was running against Ted Cruz, do you see it being different now in Texas versus when it was Beto versus Cruz?
I think so. I mean, at that time, I don't remember what year it was. I believe it was 2018. I think it was
I think that's right.
2018. And we had only just had Trump for a couple years. I don't think as much damning stuff had come out about Donald Trump at that point. So Trump supporters were pretty solidly on the Trump train. But there's a lot more Republicans that are breaking ranks with Donald Trump at this point. So I think there is a lot more motivation for Republicans and even, maybe right-leaning independents to come over and actually vote for a Democrat. So that's what I think.
Just want to make sure because you have the experience of being in Texas, so I want to make sure that we kind of capture that too. because for me as an outsider, I saw what felt like similar excitement for Beto O'Rourke that now James Tallarico has. So I see that the numbers are better in a comparison between when Beto ran and now. I just hope that that energy and that excitement stays, and Tallarico is able to give whoever his opponent is a good fight.
Beto O'Rourke, he is a great candidate. I've met him 3 times now. The first time I met him, it was prior to his race for Senate. I didn't really know who he was very well. He's a tall guy, I'll say that. I I tried to take a picture of him and put it on my Facebook, and it like either would only get the top of my head or cut off his head completely. So the next time I saw him, it was at a block walk we did for a Texas House candidate by the name of Liz Markowitz, who's actually running again for the midterms in a different district, I believe, because of redistricting and everything. But I saw Beto work, and I told him about the picture, and I was like, "Do you mind crouching down just a little bit?" And he was super cool about it. But no, he's a cool guy. I think he's a pretty moderate Democrat, in my opinion. He's very outspoken. He's not afraid to talk mess to Republicans. However, some of his bold campaign choices, I think I mentioned last time, he talked about taking everybody's AR-15s, and I
Yeah.
think that is just going to stick with especially Texas voters. And I think he's doing a lot of work. I saw a post today from him at Texas Southern University in Houston, getting out voter registration and that type of thing. So he's really engaging voters and making a lot happen in Texas. So I think he's found a different vehicle. I'm not saying he's not going to run in the future, because I'm sure he probably will. I mean, who knows? We might see him in the presidential election again. I wouldn't doubt it. I don't think he'd win, but I wouldn't doubt if he ends up in the presidential election. He's a very likable guy. He's pretty chill.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what I heard from him. I've obviously never met him, but I thought that he had quite a bit of good things to say. But yeah, the whole taking AR-15s for everybody, like, hey, that's not going to go over well there.
Well, where I'm from in Galveston County, we have Santa Fe High School, which was one that experienced a mass shooting. My sister actually went to school there at the time of the mass shooting, but because of the mass shooting, his voice resonated in the community of Santa Fe, which is known for being a very conservative community. And some of those people who might have been very pro Second Amendment really jumped behind Beto O'Rourke because he was speaking to them after the events of the Santa Fe shooting. And I think the same happened after the Uvalde shooting. I believe that's the one where, I don't know if it was a police officer or a school officer that stayed outside rather than running in to help students.
Oh, it was the chief of police who had the officers staged in the building and did nothing. And like the officers said that they could hear kids screaming and they didn't get the order to go in. And so I think he just got acquitted of murder. But I mean, he'll never work in law enforcement again. Definitely not in Texas.
That goes back to what we were talking about ICE last week, about being too afraid and shooting somebody that's unarmed or something like that, and just being kind of a pussy when it comes to dealing with these types of things. I feel the same way about this situation. Like, if you're going to wear the uniform and be in that position to protect children, if when the time comes to protect children, you're not willing to put your life on the line to do that, then you shouldn't be in that fucking position. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah, there's been so much of when you see the courage extend only to the badge itself and they can't react beyond that. And they've had all this training. We spent the thousands of dollars, not just for the best training, but you have military style equipment, you have military style munitions. And this is, the guy that was in Uvalde, I think was an average, just, 18 to 19-year-old kid with one AR-15. I mean, you were staged out there. There was no reason that you could not have opened the door and immediately engaged. Because especially, I don't expect that from a civilian. I don't think that a civilian who hasn't been trained there should know how to do that. But police officers who have received that kind of style of training absolutely should know how to do that, should know when opportunity strikes, I don't believe that they would not have had a sharpshooter available to them with a good angle through a window, even. So even if you said, we don't want to stack at the door and risk having a mass casualty event of officers, the fact that you wouldn't have a sharpshooter available is kind of unfathomable to me. So there's a lot there to unpack. At the same time, yeah, there's just a lot there that I was kind of shocked by. Like, what's the point of having a school resource officer if when it hits the fan, that's it? Yep, I'm out.
Yeah, I think it's completely ridiculous. But what I want to do now is pivot to a different topic, actually. That obviously Iran has been huge in the news as of late. But this week, I know the Trump administration and Israel and Netanyahu have been under fire because a lot of the bombing has hit very communal places, such as schools. I'm sure you heard about the school in the
Yep.
girls' school in Tehran that got hit, hospitals, and just various health infrastructure. So I'm curious to your take on that.
So I'm coming to you as like a retired intel dude. I don't know that a lot of people know this, but when you have an adversary, so for instance, uh, let's say you've got an adversary like China who might be targeting parts of like military infrastructure, so like Fort Riley, Kansas. We intentionally list where children's schools and where daycares are, so those things aren't targeted. It is intentional. That is stuff that is shared across every country because we want to make sure, hey, look, if we're going to go to war, target the things that matter. Here's where we're going to have kids in school. So I'm really kind of curious as to where that intelligence came from. I would love to see, honestly, the Appendix B, which is the intelligence portion of your operations order. So when you send a unit to combat, you send a unit to war, and you order them to do things, the Appendix B tells you specific key infrastructure, specific personalities. Hey, don't put missiles here. This is a cultural artifact or a cultural icon or a children's school or a hospital, which does more to recruit people to fight against you and against your cause than anything else. So it's very clear to me that there was very little done to adequately identify what was a legitimate target and what was not. Everything seems so hastily planned. When President Trump says, "Oh, we were going to have our pick of whoever was in charge," I think we killed him. Oops. We'll just figure something else out. Like, this is not QVC. This is not where you can just shop around and find the thing that best fits your life. This is real life, and people's lives are not just in danger, not just in Iran, but think about, a lot of countries have sleeper cells in countries. A lot of countries have access to hacking infrastructure. The Iranians, especially, have partnered with the North Koreans, who are covered. They're not covered by the Chinese, but the Chinese pretty much just ignore them and let them have their space. And I'm surprised that no one's saying, "Hey, what if the Iranians can turn off the purification systems for water in major metropolitan areas? What if they can interrupt electrical grid infrastructure in major areas in which people are going to experience such a discomfort, such a disruption that it's going to put pressure on the president to do things?" I don't see Iran retaliating in the United States with like a terrorist attack or anything. I see them doing stuff like that, like making sure that all of the creature comforts that we have are interrupted to the best of their ability.
Well, I'm not sure, and I don't think they're sure yet as far as the girls' school. I think it's still under investigation whether it was actually the United States or Israel that bombed that school. But I know it was Israel that bombed one of the hospitals. And all of this blatantly goes against the Geneva Convention as well as international humanitarian law. This seems to be a reoccurring thing with Israel. I think it brings into question, should we be in bed with Israel? I know we have been allies for a long time, and I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding how their treatment has been with Palestine because they've done similar things, fighting
Right.
against Hamas. And I get that there is some collateral damage when it comes to war, but this seems extremely intentional, in my opinion. So I like
Oh yeah.
when we invaded Iraq, for instance, we just lobbed rockets and just lit that place up.
Yeah.
We probably created more insurgents just from that. That's what I worry about with these hospitals and these schools radicalizing people that may not have been radicalized before. We're parents, right?
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
mean, If your kid goes to school and their school gets blown up because some country bombs us, I think it'll radicalize you pretty damn quick.
Yeah,
So
objectivity is going to go out the door.
absolutely. So I don't think we think about that kind of thing. We say, oh, it's just collateral damage. That's what happens in war. It's easy to say when we don't experience that over here in the United States the same way. It was a big fucking deal during 9/11 when they killed all of our friends and family in New York and the Pentagon and on Flight
Oh yeah,
93. But we don't experience that often. So I just think that really puts it in perspective. There's a big polarization between Palestine and Israel. A lot of people feel like if you say I'm pro Palestine, then I'm pro Hamas. But there's a difference. Like you
yes,
can be for not murdering Palestinian people, but completely for eradicating Hamas because Hamas is not good for the Palestinian people either. So I think if Israel was just retaliating with Hamas and making it more strategic, I don't think people would give a shit. I don't think they would. But when you start killing civilians, women, children, and targeting community infrastructure, then you really have a problem.
and I think the one thing to remember too is, regardless of who fired the missile, the American government made it. Right? We've supplied Israel with all of their munitions. So even if Israel's the one that ended up bombing the girls' school in Iran, the Americans, we made that missile. I get concerned with that, like you said, the false narrative of I don't think what Israel did in the Palestinian territories of the Gaza Strip was acceptable, and you get called an anti-Semite for that. And look, when we were training the Israelis at Fort Huachuca, we gave them drones that could go into tunnels, right? You can imagine what those drones could do. So it's hard for me to believe that you need to completely blow up a hospital because Hamas has tunnels under there when we gave you equipment to navigate and negotiate those tunnels. I agree with you. Hamas and Hezbollah, Iranian backed Wahhabist Islamic groups that have no business operating freely. And at the same time, you have done no good for yourself by just creating a sea of concrete rubble between the Gaza Strip and wherever Israel thinks its territory starts. I get worried about how that's going to affect Jewish people outside of Israel because I don't think that a lot of people have the nuance to understand that the Netanyahu government is using Zionist principles to rapidly expand Israel's influence and power at the expense of the Jewish identity and of the expense of the Jewish religion. And I don't know that a lot of people will care to have that because the destruction and the photos and the videos of everything that's going on are just so horribly bad that I don't know how you come out of watching that and saying, wow, Israel is nothing more than a terrorist nation itself.
Let me ask you this. Do you know who John Kiriakou is?
Uh-uh.
So he is the whistleblower who blew the whistle on torture in the
I
CIA.
do know, I didn't know his last name. Yes, I do know him. Yes.
And he was actually thrown in prison. It was for something else because they couldn't get him for that. I think it was treason or something. But he's trying to get a pardon from Trump right now. And I watch his podcast, and he had on a professor from Iran who was talking pretty positively about the leadership in Iran. And I was kind of following him for a moment because he was trying to give a perspective that Americans might not see. But he lost me when he started talking about bringing down the imperialistic regime in America, and I was like, okay, you lost me there. I I'm like, fuck you. I care a little bit less now, but because I mean, Iran. While I am very against the bombing of hospitals and the bombing of schools, the fact is Iran has been involved in a lot of terroristic activity
Oh,
in
yeah.
the Middle Eastern region. So I'm not that sympathetic, but the way we handle it has to be a little more
Right.
graceful.
Yeah, I think that when I think no one should have any tears that the Ayatollah is gone. When we were in Iraq, the IRGC made those EFP IEDs, the copper ones, the conical ones. So they would form like those explosive projectiles that would just melt through armor and rip people's bodies into shreds. So it's like, yeah, okay, I'm not sorry they're gone. At the same time, my concern is that this is not planned. That this is essentially like you have teenagers playing Command and Conquer, and they think, okay, well, I've blown up their command buildings, I've won the game, and you don't know who comes next. How are you going to stabilize the region? Because that region unstable controls a lot of the energy in the world. And since the markets are speculative and we pay crude oil by the barrel based on the global market, even though the United States only imports 10% of its oil, it still affects oil prices here. The idea that now you have Iran, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia blowing up all these oil storage facilities, closing down lanes for transport of oil, really does put a squeeze on the global market. My wife and I went to St. Louis this weekend to see a concert. We stayed in a hotel that had a gas station next to it. The gas was $2.78. When we got back, it was $3.01. When we got up this morning, it was $3.09. So, what do you say to those families who commute for work? If you live in Mexico, Missouri, where we do, about 80% of the community has some commute. Well, now gas prices, which are already a prominent feature of your budget, are going up, and pay's not going up around here. So, what sacrifices are people going to have to make just to get to and from work? It's going to be, I think that the effects of this are going to be felt in layers for probably at least a generation.
Well, shit, where I'm at, in some places it's more than $4 here in
Oh,
Washington.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's crazy. And I hear it's even worse in California. But the thing is, Donald Trump talked about affordability and gas prices and oil prices and all this shit. And the other day, when he was asked about how things in Iran are going to impact gas prices, he said, if they go up, they go up. I was
Yeah.
like, no shit. And this is the same guy that said he was going to be the peace president. He's not going to get us any conflicts or anything like that. And now he's saying that it was like, oh, it might be a few days, it might be a few weeks. I don't know when then it'll be. I don't know if Republicans are hearing this. If they're hearing their bullshit.
But the thing is, like, if they're hearing it, do they care? Or have they bought so far into that MAGA world where this is just like, I'm finishing this ride until it ends. So they're just like, well, until then, and they're just going down the MAGA slide. And it's insane to me because initially the war was like, oh, we're just going to hit a few targets. It's the same bombing campaign, no boots on the ground. And now they're saying, well, you never know, maybe boots on the ground. And in that, I think it was the same interview you were talking about where he said, if they go up, they go up. Another reporter asked Donald Trump, hey, are you worried about retaliatory attacks on American citizens here? It's like, well, I said some people might die from war. And it just blows your mind. Like, you're the American president and you are so indifferent, recklessly indifferent to the idea that there might be some of your own people in this country who are going to suffer an attack because you didn't do the things that you were supposed to do correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was 6 soldiers that died already.
Yeah.
And soldiers are one thing, of course. It's a tragedy when soldiers die as well. But we signed up for that. A lot of these other
Yep.
people did not sign up for that. I'm all for military killing military. We signed up to fight the good fight.
That's the game. Yep.
And
Yep.
so
That's
if
the game.
we're in Iraq or Afghanistan and a mortar lands at us or we get shot or whatever, we know the cost. We knew it when we got there. We knew it when we signed our contract. It's an all voluntary force now. So, I mean, we don't really have any excuse, but the civilians, they did not sign that contract. So I'm very
Right.
against involving the civilian population. I've always felt like collateral damage was such a cop out. I
Like
just,
an excuse for bad intelligence. I always felt that way too. I have a high expectation for the intelligence services because I've seen what it looks like when it does itself right. Right? When you're in a unit that takes it seriously, and it's like to the point where we don't make jokes about things because we don't even want that to be a real thing, right? You won't say, well, if we miss it, I guess we just took out, we just destroyed this thing. Like we say, that's not funny. Like, we pride ourselves on accuracy. We pride ourselves on we have the best information and we give the best advice. When we were in Afghanistan, one of our top 10 guys was at a wedding and we had to persuade the colonel to wait until he drove away from it because at least the people who are celebrating a new life together aren't going to have it marred by a missile hitting the area. When we knew he was going to travel 3 miles up the road and be desolate, we'd still achieve the same goal and it would do less damage to us in the long run because now we haven't created a bunch of propaganda videos and film and pictures that are going to recruit fighters to your cause. Lord forbid we put boots on the ground in Iran. I don't think that this administration has thought out the mountainous terrain that's there and how hard that's going to be to traverse and how many of those people are going to be willing to sign up to just kill us because of what we've done to them. I don't think that they're supporting the Ayatollah or the Islamic government. I just think that they'd be happy to just get rid of us.
Yeah, well, another thing I saw, which I found interesting this week, is that Ukraine has actually stepped in to allow us like interceptor drones in Iran. And I think that's very interesting, just because I know that there's been some beef between the Trump administration and Zelensky, but he's doing it so that he can get Patriot missiles from us in exchange to fight against Russia.
Right?
But I think he's gotten smart, because I know that one meeting at the White House a while back, when JD Vance and Trump tried to act like they were putting him in check. I think he's realized what the Trump administration wants and how petty Donald Trump can be. But I do also feel like the conflict in Iran is really taken away from the seriousness of what's going on between Russia and Ukraine at the same time. Now, I don't know if you will agree with me on this or not. I definitely know that a lot of Democrats and people on the left are for Ukraine as opposed to Russia. And I know we've sent aid, we've sent MLRS and HIMARS missile launchers and
Right.
Patriots and such. But I've always felt, and I don't say this out loud very often, but if we had boots on the ground somewhere, I felt like it should be in Ukraine. And they've lost 20% of their country, including Crimea. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if I've ever told you this. I started out my Army career as a Russian linguist. So all of my extra training was kind of in this area of the world. If we were to put boots on the ground, that would be where we would be the most effective. The Russians would run away, right? So Russians really use proxy forces quite a bit, or they'll bring in their own people that they force in. So the other thing too is Russia is probably one of the more racist nations in the world. And I say this as an American. When you look at places out, especially farther out to the east, like around Vladivostok, they all look Asian. So you have these Asian soldiers who have this Asian complexion that are the first people to be mandatorily drafted because Putin and the Russian people see them as chattel. In the Russian government itself, the current would be their Secretary of Defense. His name is General Sergei Shoigu. There was this discussion of like, could General Shoigu rise up and get rid of Putin? And he couldn't because the Russian people who live in St. Petersburg and Moscow, you're predominantly white. People who see themselves more European than Asian would never accept him because he's from a southern portion of the country where his complexion and his facial features do not represent or reflect what they want. So you do have kind of that push and that pull. The Russians themselves have for decades, the Putin regime, the best way to explain it is kind of like if you could imagine like the godfather of Temu, right, running a country, that is what Putin and his oligarchs are. They have the strong arm tactics, right? But they think about things in such this weird, just almost like when you ask someone like in MAGA what makes America great, and they come up with this falsified version of American history that's not real. That's how Putin's people are. They have this idea that Russia was once this great empire where it could challenge any nation on earth, and it was like, no, you weren't. Even at the highest point in the Russian government, where you had the czars who could go to war with Napoleon, you still were so badly planned militarily, you didn't realize that they were not using the Gregorian calendar, they were using the Julian calendar and had set their cannons up in the fields weeks before you got there. So there is a history, a consistent history in Russia of projectionism. I think that's how their governments worked. To see that we did not follow through on that, I figured that would have been a really good use of military force. I am so sorry that Zelensky has had to go through the embarrassments that the Trump administration has put them through, especially because you're like he and the Ukrainians are the real reason that that war is no longer being fought by Poland and Germany. And if Ukraine falls, that's what's happening next. Putin sees himself as the next great czar of Russia. He's going to bring back the Russian imperiums. He's going to control all the way up, through parts of Austria. He's going to control parts of what was, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Kosovo, Albania, that kind of stuff. And I don't think he'll stop until he's forced to stop. So it is interesting to see the Ukrainians kind of, okay, well, we'll give you this, but we have to have this as well. So I hope that that works out best for the Ukrainians. I think that honestly, that the ability to mire down the Russian forces there has kind of put a halt on what I would feel would be a fast advance to World War III.
I mean, I think stopping the Russians is a big thing because, in my opinion, we go against somebody like Iran, who was not a big threat to us, at least not presently. However, we have adversaries like Russia and North Korea, which could potentially hit U.S. soil with a rocket. Now, their artillery kind of sucks, but they do have the capability. They do,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it just seems like we get off in the weeds dealing with these countries like Iran and Venezuela, who, Maduro, I'm not saying Maduro was a good dude. I'm happy for the Venezuelans that are happy that he's gone. I am. But was that really of benefit to the United States of America? I saw that Donald Trump is trying to create some kind of a committee or something.
The Shield of the Americas thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
to bring in other countries to go against the cartels, which I think is, I don't know how I feel. I mean, obviously, I'm not for drug cartels, but I just feel like there's really bigger fish to fry than dealing with that.
My concern is too is why do we get the right to go into places like Ecuador to take on a cartel? I understand the logic at the MAGA level is they do drugs are bad. Okay, but we have other controls inside of our country to handle that. That doesn't require us to drop, our forces into the jungles in Ecuador, violating that country's sovereignty simply because they can't resist us. It's like, oh well, what are you gonna do about it? Well, you know what? There's eventually gonna come a time where they're all gonna band together and they're gonna do something about it. And this false machismo way of handling our business is really just not a good way to be a good neighbor. I think shows that we can't be trusted. And I don't think that the Republicans who are okay with this understand that this is going to follow us for years.
Absolutely. And I actually saw Rosie O'Donnell, when she always speaks out against Trump, but she spoke out against him for contradicting his whole anti-war
Oh yeah.
campaign promises. But obviously, celebrities have a tendency to speak up about various political topics. I saw today that Batista was speaking up for women's rights. Jack White, Carrie Coon, they were on the same boat as Rosie O'Donnell. And of course, Mark Ruffalo, he's very pro Palestine and very anti Trump. And then I saw Billy Bob Thornton recently said something about wanting to see less celebrities speak out about these things at award shows. And I know there's people on different sides of the topic. Some people are like, celebrities should just shut the fuck up and do what they do and stay away from politics. And then other people are like, well, they have this big platform. They're in a position, in a very privileged position, and they need to use that platform for good and all this stuff. What say you?
I'm kind of a look, use your platform for things that matter. And understand the audience. If I go to an award show and I stand up and I win an award and I say, we need to make sure that childhood hunger is eradicated. I think the understanding I would take away from that is that the people who are watching those award shows are going to agree with you. People who are more inclined to the arts and the appreciation of the arts tend to be those who also see the injustice through the world and typically advocate for it. I think it would be, I don't care, honestly. Speak your mind, go for it. I also don't watch the award shows because I don't care. Um, but I also get that celebrities do have an amazing platform. And I think with social media allowing them to engage with millions of people at once, that's typically where I would want it to be. I think where you have more diverse sets of eyes on it. Because the only people I know that still watch like the Oscars is like my mom, and she's in her 60s. So I don't, it doesn't bother me. I just, yeah, it's fine. Go for it. Do it. Speak your mind. You won the award. You got your 30 to 45 seconds and you want to use it to talk about Palestinian people. Do it. But also, I think it's important these days to show people I'm going to put a little bit of my efforts outside of this where this is too. So if you're like, the Palestinian people really need our help, I'm going to make a donation to this place, the World Central Kitchen, to make sure that those people still get fed. I think you show that you're not just saying it, but you're leading with, I'm not just going to say this, I'm also going to lead here. And if you want to be with me on this, you can donate here to make sure people have food. That'd be my only criticism.
I'm the same way. I mean, I only really catch the highlights of these award shows. I don't actually watch them. But I just have been seeing that a lot in the media. And I even saw the Batista quote. I'm not going to say it because I don't remember exactly what it was, but it had to do with standing up for women's rights and that type of thing. And people are kind of just like, shut the fuck up and act. You know, those are the types of comments that were in there. But it was mostly conservatives, obviously. But
Yeah.
what I find interesting about that is they're very critical about the left wing ones. And I would say there's probably more left wing celebrities
No.
speaking out than right wing. But then you have somebody like Chris Rock. Well, not, excuse me. I'm sorry, Chris. Kid Rock, who speaks out against trans rights and against anything on the left wing. I don't know if you saw the video of him shooting up a case of Bud Light.
God.
And I mean,
Yeah.
somebody like that, they have zero problem with. So again, it's just another contradiction, in my opinion. It seems to be a reoccurring thing with Republicans. It's just contradicting their own bullshit.
It's so hard to take them seriously because of that. Anytime that they show up and they're starting to talk about, scream about some sort of issue, it just makes me go, oh, great. Here we go. Are you just gonna like, and they just, it's almost like if the National Enquirer was a person, because it's and always in all caps, and they just walk around with their conspiracy theories like, JFK is still alive. You're like, oh, yeah, great. Okay, yeah. All right. Sounds great. It's such a lack of, it's almost like if I scream stuff at you, you have to treat it as equally as if I talk to you normally. No, there's so many things that the conservatives have these days that are just not based in reality. And it's hard for me to look at them and take them seriously. It's also exhausting. Like anytime that my uncle pipes up on my Facebook page and he's big into the MAGA world, it's just like I don't want to be hurtful, but I also don't know where that line is for you. And I also would never want you to think like I think less of you personally as a human being, but you believe some kind of crazy shit and you're willing to twist yourself into pretzels to justify making excuses for people doing the things that you are in the next breath railing against. Like there's a stunning lack of just coordinating your beliefs and your ethos with what's real. And I don't know, it's just really hard.
Well, there's so much contradiction, and they also miss a lot of nuance. That's the thing
Yeah.
that drives me nuts in politics and puts me in a really unpopular position and many times because there's so much nuance that's missed. It's not just on the right; it's on the left too.
Yeah.
But like back to the mass shootings, they always think we want to take their guns, which I'm pro Second Amendment, but I also agree that things need to be put in place so that we don't have these mass shootings. And you're not going to stop everybody. There's going to be instances of these things occurring. But, when we talk about taking AR-15s or having regulations having to do with assault style weapons, they lump all the gun deaths together. They'll put suicides, they'll put, stick ups and armed robberies and things like that,
Right. Yeah.
not including mass shootings. And they say, look, oh, there's more gun deaths at the hand of handguns, you
Yeah.
know, than these assault style rifles. But when you lump them all together, you miss the nuance. Or with reproductive health, when they take away Roe versus Wade and they say Democrats are killing babies and all this stuff. But the interesting thing is, when it comes to places like Planned Parenthood, only about 3% of what they do has anything to do with abortion. They do mammograms, they do, even for men, they'll test for like testicular cancer and that type of thing. In these left leaning states that have contraceptive programs and are more friendly with organizations like Planned Parenthood, have a lower abortion rate, which they just gloss over. So it's just all these little nuanced things. Or Democrats are for open borders. We're not for open borders. We're not. We just want things to be fair. We also want to be humane at the same time. So there's a balance there. And I feel like they always miss that balance. And a lot of it has to do with news media like Fox News and all that bullshit. That's just what I see.
I mean, I guess The thing is, too, is do you know where they get this idea that Biden let millions of people across the border? I don't understand where that had come from because there's this MAGA belief that Joe Biden let millions of people come across the border. I thought, I don't think he sent out invitations. Are you saying he was just so old that it was still happening at a rate that was unacceptable? Like, do you have any idea where that came from?
I don't know. But you know, you have something like the State of the Union, and Trump's throwing out stats like, I've had zero immigration across the Mexican border. The fuck? Zero? Like you could have come up with a more believable stat than zero. Like nobody believes that. How the fuck are you expecting anybody to believe that? And I think the funny thing is for the State of the Union, I don't know if you watched it, but they put like the stats up as he said them. And I'm
I
like,
didn't see that
it's
yet.
just like, are you just offering the left wing media to call you on your bullshit so we could have a good meme or something? Because that's what it looked like. You know, he tried to call the Democrats out a lot. He was like, "Oh, you want to stand for this, but you don't want to stand for that. You don't want illegals out of our country and all this stuff." Because the only thing they stood for was, I think, the hockey team and the
The
veterans that
banning
got
of and then the
that
banning
got
of
arrested.
stock trades. When he said he wants Congress to ban stock trading, I thought most of the Democrats stood for that too. At least Elizabeth Warren did. I know that's been a big cause of hers. Yeah, that whole State of the Union was just, I don't know. I felt very odd about it in the sense that the entire thing was like the mafia talking about what they achieved over the past year. It was like, oh yeah, we've got all this oil that we got from our friends in Venezuela. You're like, that we stole is what you're saying. We stole that oil. And here we're gonna give a Medal of Honor to this CW5 who got shot while committing a war crime, possibly. He flew in and we stole this world leader and he got shot a few times and he still flew the helicopter. And now we're gonna give him the nation's highest honor. Well, are we diluting that honor because this person potentially participated in an event that could be seen as a war crime? I don't, it just felt very bizarro world. It felt very antithetical to what I would hope that the country would be. Like when we were in uniform, I would think that that warrant officer would not have been as well honored as he was publicly. And I get that the president did it because he needed the wins, he needed the visibility on the here's me, I'm going to celebrate all these veterans. You can't be mad, you can't stand, you can't scream at me. These people are heroes, and I'm the president of heroes. I get the symbolism behind it. At the same time, I don't think that he did the country any favors with any of it at all. And I felt that it was just genuinely what you would see like a 15-year-old boy do. You know, the 15-year-old boy in the neighborhood who thought he was the top shit. He'd be like, well, why don't you just do me this? Huh? Why don't you stand up? If you think your job is to protect Americans and not illegals, and then he'd be like, look, the Democrats aren't going to stand. Told you. Well, yeah, of course we're not going to stand for that because you're still protecting pedophiles. So you can't tell me that you're for the protection of American citizens when you're protecting the people who are trafficking and raping children. Like it's hard for me to even get behind anything that you say. Even if yeah, sure, at the bare level, I agree. We should be all protecting the American people. You just don't do that. And there's no part of you that intends to do that. And because of that, I'm not going to participate in your masturbatory exercise where we're all just jacking each other off to feel good about America and those stupid USA chants that just broke out all the damn time. You're in Congress. If you did not serve in uniform, you weren't part of a Team USA, you're not a citizen who's going to Team USA events, you're not there to go into these patriotic, like rah rah, this boom boss stuff. Your job is to do and pass the nation's laws so we actually have health care. We have roads that don't have potholes in them. Like there's a lot of problems that you could solve instead of screaming USA every 5 minutes.
And you know, what I think is interesting, I saw in the media recently with all the war in Iran and everything, is people are suggesting to send Barron Trump to the front
I did
line.
see
There's
that.
like petitions and everything, and the White House released a statement saying that he was too tall, that he's or not 5'9", excuse me, 6'9". And as a former Army recruiter, I want to clear some things up. So the height standard does cap out at 6'8". That is true. However, there is a 2-inch waivable criteria. So you can be wavered plus or minus 2 inches outside of the standard. And I don't know if you know this, but Barron Trump's father is the highest ranking officer in our military. So I don't think he would have any problem whatsoever getting that waiver approved. So I just thought that was worth noting. I think it's funny. I mean, obviously he's not going to go into the military. Why the fuck would he?
Right.
I mean, President Bone Spur, got out of Vietnam, which I get it. It wasn't a popular war. There's a lot of people trying to get out of Vietnam. I know people talk about Clinton being a draft dodger and all kinds of people. So, it's hard to talk shit about Trump with that because it was a very unpopular war. I mean, it's not like
Yeah.
what we experienced in Iraq. I mean, Iraq wasn't a popular war either, but it was a little bit more popular considering we got attacked in 9/11, not by Iraq, but
Right.
by we use that as momentum to go there.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen some reports that there's, and I don't know how true this is, that there's movement towards like they've got. So one of our local Democratic officials is also part of the local Selective Service Board, who said, "Hey, we've been called to meet," which I don't know means anything outside of there's a conflict going. Let's just go over protocols just in case, dust off the manuals so we know what happens. Because I know how the Army does that, right? Especially in the intelligence community. So they're going to say, okay, we need to fill this many slots. So what they'll do is they'll come back and they'll say, we can take this many people from the IRR. So they'll get all those IRR people who haven't met their 8-year commitment yet, and they'll fill those ranks. And then if they don't have that, they'll take people off the temporary disabled retirement list and say, we're now going to waiver whatever you have that was disabling and you couldn't meet requirements then. This is a national emergency exemption, so we're going to put you back into service. I don't know that you need that many people to institute a draft anymore. And maybe as a recruiter, you could speak to that better. But because I just kind of have that, I'm an intel guy, and this is what I saw them do post 9/11 during the surge in '07, especially. They would call people off the TDRL and the IRR to fill those slots. So I just think a draft is probably unlikely.
I think a draft is unlikely. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I just see it as unlikely. Yes, we are getting ourselves into a lot of unnecessary bullshit overseas with Venezuela, Ecuador, Iran. There's Russia, and so there's a lot of potential, but we haven't like truly put boots on the ground anywhere. So I just
Yeah.
don't see us needing those numbers. We have so many assets, drones and aircrafts that can fly over there, bomb, and be home by lunch. So it's not like we really need all those troops. And I mean, I still think we have the best fighting force in the world. You know, despite what I think about the Trump administration, I fully believe that. I do also think we're only as strong as our allies at the same time, which I think Trump is really shitting all over that. But I think our allies are getting wise to dealing with Trump at the same time. I think that they realize that his reign is temporary. I mean, even the way we deal with Canada, I think they get it. They're like, okay, we got to tough it out. We'll do what we got to do to deal with this fucking clown and wait for America to get back on the rails. I think most countries are wise enough to see that. But as back to the draft, I do not see us doing a draft. I don't. But I don't see the necessity. I mean, there's a lot of potential for a World War III. There's a lot of shit going on right now. But as long as and this is the big thing, as long as they can end the Iran conflict swiftly, I don't know if they will. I fucking hope they will. They talk like they will. If they do that, then I won't sweat it. But if they don't, then I just don't know. I don't know, man.
I did see an article in Stars and Stripes that All-Chief Focus Lens was suddenly canceled this year.
What's that?
That the All-Chief Focus Lens, the spring exercise in Korea, had suddenly been canceled this
Oh
year,
yeah.
which had spurred the idea that there was an imminent troop deployment. I said there's a lot of reasons they cancel that. So I don't know about that specifically, but if you were to see a wave of those across the Army, because even Fort Riley did like a spring exercise every year, and if that one gets canceled, and you have that like at like Fort Bragg, Fort Campbell, Fort Hood, it's almost an indicator that we're going to put boots on the ground somewhere. We
Well,
don't
you
need to do
know,
our annual training. We just got to go get ready to go.
that yearly exercise they do in South Korea, that was my first duty assignment, which is a long ass time ago now. But I know North Korea would always use that to say, "Oh, this is an act of war" and all this other bullshit. They would shoot rockets at Japan, and do all this unnecessary bullshit. They didn't really do anything. North Korea's like that. Kim Jong Un,
Yeah.
who is another one of Trump's bros, he's just so much like him too. He's such a bitch.
Oh
I,
yeah.
I mean, they always like to poke and prod. But they never really do anything. North Korea has the potential to be very dangerous, but I don't think they would ever fucking step over that line. But the potential is so great.
Well, and when you look at like how the Kim family has ruled over that country, I think deep down they know if they were to step out of line, they'd get shellacked. And that family has enjoyed this privilege for at least 80 years now. I remember like when we were there in Korea, I did 2 tours there. It's it's funny every time they're like, we're closer to nuclear annihilation now than we've ever been. Like, okay, well, you said that 6 months ago. So are we just is it like just millimeters for moving forward to that line for you? I know it's hard to take them seriously too. Like my first tour there. So my first tour in Korea, Kim Jong Il was still alive, and I got put up in a different duty station up real far north, and they had these megaphones, like across the country and stuff, and they were broadcasting this message, and our cook was dying laughing. And I asked him, I said, "What's so funny?" And he said, "Oh, they're telling you that if they don't start shitting in their yards for fertilizer, they're violating the principles of the revolution and they'll be executed. So don't you dare go to the bathroom in a normal place. You shit in your yard when we tell you to grow rice because that's the only way we're going to have food this year." Like, so part of me says, yeah, North Korea could be dangerous, but they were also so food insecure and energy insecure. I don't know that they're dangerous for much longer than like 24 to 36 hours.
The only way I see them being dangerous is if they start buddying up more with Russia, and I would say China, but China sort of, they have a weird relationship with North Korea. They treat them kind of like a
A
cousin Eddie,
child.
you know, that weird cousin or something. Like they're like,
Yeah.
we just keep a safe distance from these people. We're not really sure. That's the only thing that worries me about that. But I think it's been a great conversation today. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
I'm interested to see how the next week goes. My concern would be that if the war in Iran draws out any further and we start having more, we start getting drawn into that, China could see an opening here for potentially taking Taiwan or for even getting involved as a proxy to the conflict. So that's kind of just my thoughts for the next week. But other than that, I think we've covered everything over the past week.
Perfect. We'll see what the next week brings us. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to Tactical Pause Podcast. I'm Kevin Price.
And then Reed,
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
yep, we'll see you then.